Somewhere in the world right now, a student is sitting alone at a desk, exhausted, staring at TOEFL practice questions and wondering if all this effort will ever be enough. Maybe that student is you. Maybe you're tired of studying without seeing progress, tired of feeling nervous every time you practice speaking, tired of watching your dream university feel just a little too far away. But what if the difference between a 90 and a 100+ score is not talent at all? What if it's simply having the right strategy, the right habits, and finally believing that you are capable of more than you think?
Oh, man. You know, the sheer weight of that exhaustion, it's something we see so frequently.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
Right, and it almost always stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of what is actually happening in the brain when we prepare for a test of this magnitude.
Okay, so it's a structural thing.
Without a doubt. The absolute biggest barrier to language test success is this pervasive, incredibly damaging illusion that fluency is some sort of innate magical talent.
Right, like you're just born with it.
Spot on. There is this myth that you either have the genetic gift for languages or you are just doomed to struggle. But the biological truth is entirely different.
Which is such a relief, honestly.
It really is. Because fluency, and specifically test-taking fluency, is a highly measurable, buildable skill. It is mechanical. It's architectural. It's not magic. It's neuroscience.
Well, welcome to this deep dive. Today, our mission is to completely deconstruct the mechanics of achieving a 100+ score on the TOEFL, and we're going to do it without you burning out in the process.
Because nobody wants to burn out.
Obviously. So we are breaking down the strategies, the daily schedules, the necessary mindsets, and the real-world evidence to figure out how to bridge that gap.
Yeah, because if you're putting in the hours, if you're sitting at that desk until midnight and not seeing the score move...
The problem isn't your intelligence.
Perfectly said. The problem is the blueprint you are using.
So let's look at that blueprint. But before we can begin pouring the foundation for a new one, we kind of have to clear the construction site, right?
We do. We have to look at the habits you are likely practicing right now and dismantle the illusion of, quote-unquote, hard work versus effective practice.
Because doing the wrong thing for 6 hours a day
is still doing the wrong thing.
Yeah. Let's start with the most common trap. When someone decides to study for a major language exam, what's the very first thing they usually do?
Oh, they gravitate toward what feels productive in the short term.
Right. You go online, you order a massive 500-page vocabulary book, you find a list of incredibly advanced, dense, academic-sounding words.
Words like ameliorate, superfluous.
Ostensibly ubiquitous. You write them down in a pristine new notebook.
Naturally.
You repeat them out loud a few times. You run through flashcards. And when you close that book, you feel this incredible rush of dopamine.
You really do. You feel a deep sense of satisfaction because you put in 2 hours of studying.
But, and here is the incredibly uncomfortable reality that nobody wants to admit, when you finally sit down in that actual testing center, under those harsh fluorescent lights,
with the digital clock ticking down.
Yeah, those words are just gone. They completely evaporate.
They vanish completely, and the immediate reaction is to blame yourself. You think, I have a terrible memory. I am just not smart enough.
Which is so heartbreaking.
It is, but it has absolutely nothing to do with your baseline intelligence or your memory capacity. It has everything to do with how the human brain evolved to process and store language.
Okay, break that down for us.
So, memorizing a word in total isolation, stripped of all surrounding meaning, is almost completely useless from a cognitive standpoint.
Really? Completely useless?
Pretty much. Your brain is a highly efficient, ruthlessly pragmatic organ. Its primary job is survival. So it actively discards information that it does not deem necessary, contextual, or emotionally resonant.
Wow.
Yeah, it stores language the exact same way it stores human experiences through context, sensory input, emotion, and repetition in real living situations.
I always think of this like trying to become a master chef without ever turning on a stove.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. Memorizing random dictionary words in isolation is like going to a high-end specialty grocery store, buying all these incredibly expensive exotic ingredients, saffron, truffles, obscure spices.
And then just throwing them into a dark pantry.
Yes, you own them, sure, they are in your house. But you never actually learned how they interact.
You don't know what happens when you heat them up.
Exactly. Oh. Wait, spot on. You don't know what flavors they complement or how they fundamentally change the texture of a dish.
So when it's time to serve a complex dinner to guests, or in this case, take a 4-hour language proficiency test,
you're just standing there staring at a pantry full of raw ingredients that you have absolutely no idea how to use in a sentence.
That is a perfect illustration of the disconnect. The test does not ask you to list ingredients. It demands that you recognize those words as they are actively doing heavy lifting inside a complex sentence.
Right, like noticing subtle shifts in tone.
Yeah, within an academic lecture, or tracking a complicated argument in a reading passage, without the context, the word ameliorate is just a random, meaningless string of syllables.
So the brain just dumps it.
Totally. Your hippocampus, which plays a major role in learning and memory, has absolutely nothing to anchor that word to. There is no emotional tag, no visual memory, no auditory context.
So it simply gets flushed out of your working memory.
Without a doubt.
Okay, so if vocabulary flashcards are the first trap, the second massive trap is the subtitle crutch.
Oh, this one. This one is particularly insidious.
Because it feels so much like genuine immersive practice. You spend 3 years watching English videos on YouTube, binging Netflix documentaries, streaming international news.
I tell yourself, I'm immersing myself in the language environment.
Right. But you have been watching every single minute of that media with the English subtitles turned on.
And this is a devastating habit for test preparation.
Devastating. That seems harsh.
I mean it, though. When you have the subtitles on, every single word is handed to you visually. You might think you are listening, but you are actually just reading. The human brain will always take the path of least resistance. Processing visual information like reading text is much easier for your brain than deciphering novel auditory inputs.
So your visual processing centers are doing all the heavy lifting.
Yeah, while your auditory processing centers are essentially sitting on the couch doing nothing,
Yeah.
your ears never truly get the rigorous biological workout they need.
Okay, wait, I have to push back on that a little bit, though.
Sure.
Is there really zero benefit there? Because it feels like any exposure to English media should be beneficial. Even if I have the subtitles on, I'm still hearing the rhythm of the language. I'm picking up on cultural nuances. I'm seeing how native speakers interact. Surely that general exposure counts for something in the long run.
Well, it counts for general familiarity, without a doubt. Passive exposure is absolutely a valid tool in the very early stages of language acquisition. It helps your brain get a feel for the melody and the general prosody of the language. But we are not talking about casual travel here.
Right, we're talking about an exam.
We're talking about surviving a grueling academic assessment. Passive listening does not build the specific, if your auditory pathways haven't been explicitly trained for that unsupported high-speed environment, all the vocabulary flashcards in the world won't save you.
You'll just start translating in your head.
Spot on. You will inevitably revert to translating the words into your native language, and by the time your brain finishes translating the first sentence, the professor in the audio track is already halfway through the fourth sentence.
You are perpetually left behind.
Always.
Which naturally brings us to perhaps the most painful, visceral part of the test for so many learners.
The speaking section.
The speaking section.
Yeah.
This is widely considered the most terrifying hurdle for international students. And the phenomenon experienced here isn't just psychological, right? It is intensely physical.
We are talking about speaking paralysis.
Yes. You sit there, you read the prompt on the screen, you know what you want to say.
The idea is sitting right there in your heart.
Crystal clear in your native language.
Yeah.
You have the perfect argument formulated. But the sheer millisecond, that little microphone icon on the screen turns red.
Something chemical happens in your body.
Your throat physically tightens, your chest gets heavy.
The vocabulary you knew 5 minutes ago disappears into thin air.
You start speaking way too fast because you're panicking. Then you realize you're rushing and making grammar mistakes, so you abruptly slow down too much.
You completely lose your train of thought. You start saying and
And when the recording finally stops, you sit there feeling like you barely even recognize the voice that just came out of your mouth.
It's brutal, but what is most fascinating and deeply tragic about this is how we misinterpret this physiological response.
How do you mean?
Well, students experience this chest tightness, this mental blankness, and they instantly internalize it as a failure of their linguistic ability.
Right, they construct a narrative that says, I am a terrible English speaker. I am an imposter.
Yes, but what they are experiencing has almost nothing to do with their English skills. These are the classic textbook signs of an acute biological stress response. It is the fight-or-flight mechanism taking over.
The amygdala hijack.
Specifically, the amygdala, the fear center of your brain, perceives the testing environment, the ticking clock, the red microphone, the pressure of university admissions as a literal threat to your survival.
Wow, a literal threat.
It floods your system with cortisol. And this stress hormone fundamentally impairs the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain responsible for complex cognitive behavior, decision-making, and crucially, working memory.
So your cognitive load is just maxed out.
Completely maxed out by managing the fear, leaving zero bandwidth available for language retrieval. Your study method up to this point simply hasn't matched what the test actually demands.
Which is the ability to produce coherent output while your nervous system is under stress.
Perfectly said.
So there is a complete mismatch between how we prepare in the safety of our bedrooms and how we are required to perform in the arena.
Absolutely.
And that leads directly into the final trap we need to dismantle before we start building our new strategy. The myth of the sprint.
The idea that you can cram for a language.
It is the heartbreaking belief that sheer intensity can somehow replace daily consistency.
Right. So many bright, incredibly driven students believe that if they just block out 1 month before the test, push themselves to the absolute limit of human endurance.
Do hundreds and hundreds of practice questions.
Stay up until 3 in the morning every single night chugging energy drinks. They will miraculously jump their score from an 80 to a 100 plus.
They treat it like finals week in a history class.
And it simply biologically does not work that way. Language acquisition is not a sprint. It is the ultimate marathon.
You can't cram a language like a list of dates.
You just can't. Learning a language is a slow, methodical, and often frustratingly invisible biological process. You are quite literally forcing your brain to forge new neural pathways.
Building structural connections between neurons.
Yeah, you are triggering a process called myelination, where the brain wraps a fatty sheath around the neural pathways that are used frequently, making the transmission of electrical signals faster and more efficient.
And you can't rush that.
You cannot force a physical, biological process to happen overnight through sheer willpower, panic, or sleep deprivation.
It brings us back to biology. You can't force a plant to grow faster by standing over it and pulling aggressively on its leaves.
You're just going to rip the plant out of the soil.
Spot on. That's a terrible gardening strategy.
It really is. That is the perfect way to look at it, though. You cannot force the growth, but you absolutely have the power to nurture it.
And you nurture it through structured, consistent, daily exposure and practice.
That is the only proven way those fragile new neural connections become thick, efficient, high-speed highways rather than tiny, overgrown dirt paths that your brain struggles to navigate.
So what does this actually mean for you, the person listening to this deep dive right now?
It means we need to stop cramming.
We need to permanently turn off the subtitle.
We need to stop throwing exotic words into a dark pantry.
Right. So if the intense, month-long sprint is biologically ineffective, what target should you actually be aiming for? Let's take a step back and decode the actual math and the mindset required to hit a 100-plus score.
This is where we really need to strip away the anxiety and look at the cold, hard mechanics of the exam. A lot of students hold a very fuzzy, incredibly intimidating concept of what a score of 100 actually represents.
They view it as this insurmountable mountain of flawless perfection.
Let's break down the sheer anatomy of a 100. The test is scored out of 120 total points.
There are 4 distinct sections:
Right.
reading, listening, speaking, and writing.
Each section is worth 30 points. Now, to hit that magic, life-changing number of 100, you absolutely do not need a perfect 30 in any single section.
That bears repeating. You do not need a perfect 30.
What's fascinating here is how much relief that single fact brings to test takers. Perfection is a complete myth.
So what is the exam actually engineered to measure?
It's engineered to measure academic proficiency and survivability, not absolute linguistic flawlessness.
So what does a realistic score profile look like for someone crossing that 100 mark?
Well, it looks something like this. You might aim for a reading score somewhere between 24 and 28.
Okay.
Your listening score might land between 23 and 26. Your speaking score could be sitting comfortably between 22 and 25.
And your writing score?
Generally falls between 24 and 27.
You know, when you hear those actual numbers out loud,
Yeah.
22 out of 30 on the speaking section, it suddenly feels so much more breathable, doesn't it?
It takes the pressure off.
You are not chasing a flawless performance. You are allowed to make mistakes. You are allowed to stumble over a word.
The true target you are aiming for is consistent competence across all 4 domains.
Consistent competence. I love that phrase.
It's all it is. You are simply proving to the invisible evaluators that you have the cognitive and linguistic tools to handle the academic rigors of a university environment without completely drowning in the coursework.
And to do that efficiently, you have to deeply understand what the test actually rewards in each of those specific sections.
Because it is rarely what students naturally assume.
Let's look at reading and listening first, the input sections. What are the test makers actually trying to measure?
They are heavily rewarding academic comprehension and structural tracking. This goes so far beyond just testing whether you know what individual vocabulary words mean in a vacuum.
They're looking at the big picture.
Yeah, they are actively testing your ability to follow complex, multi-layered, evolving arguments. They want to see if you can understand implied meanings, the underlying concepts the author or the professor suggests without ever explicitly stating them.
Can you pick up on the subtle, logical relationships between completely contrasting ideas?
Exactly. Perfectly stated. When a professor in a listening track shifts from explaining a main scientific theory to suddenly discussing an obscure exception to that theory, can your brain pivot with them?
That requires higher order cognitive processing, not just rote translation.
And then we shift to writing, where the evaluators are heavily rewarding synthesis.
Meaning combining different sources.
Right. They want to see if you can take dense information from a reading passage, mentally combine it with conflicting information from an audio lecture, and organize it all into a clear, unified, cohesive argument on paper.
Organization is the absolute paramount skill there. They want undeniable proof that you can structure your chaotic thoughts logically under extreme time constraints.
But here's where it gets really interesting and where I think the most misconceptions lie, especially regarding the speaking section.
Oh, definitely.
The rubrics show that the test primarily rewards fluency, coherence, and the raw ability to communicate your ideas clearly under pressure.
It does not reward a perfect Hollywood-style American accent.
That is a vital distinction that cannot be overstated. A staggering amount of student anxiety is unnecessarily tied up in accent reduction.
People spend hundreds of hours trying to sound like a native California.
But human evaluators are specifically trained to look past your accent. They simply care about delivery. Is your speech paced relatively well, or are you rushing and then freezing?
They care about language use.
Oh.
Are you using grammatical structures that accurately serve your intended meaning?
And they care deeply about topic development. Did you actually answer the specific prompt, or did you go off on an unrelated tangent because you had a pre-memorized speech?
So you can have a very heavy, distinct regional accent and still score beautifully if your underlying ideas are coherent and your continuous delivery is fluid.
Absolutely.
So knowing all this, knowing the raw math of the score and the hidden mechanics of what is actually being evaluated, what is the actual realistic timeline for success?
If you are a student sitting in the low 80s right now, feeling stuck,
how long does it biologically and practically take to climb into the hundreds?
The consensus on this is very clear and very sobering. For most dedicated, hard-working learners, making that specific 20-point jump from the 80s into the low hundreds realistically takes anywhere from 3 to 6 months of structured, highly disciplined daily study.
3 to 6 months, not 3 weeks.
Not 3 weeks. And for some students, depending on their baseline, it takes longer than 6 months.
We need to explicitly normalize that.
There is absolutely no shame in a longer timeline. Language acquisition is highly individual. But if we connect this to the bigger picture of how the brain learns, the ultimate undeniable truth is that consistency will beat intensity every single time.
1 hour of genuinely focused, thoughtful daily study will profoundly outperform 5 sleepless nights of panicked, caffeine-fueled cramming right before test day.
Because of the myelination and memory consolidation processes we discussed earlier, your brain literally requires adequate sleep and downtime to absorb, process, map, and structurally store what it is learning.
When you cram, you are forcibly holding a massive amount of information in your short-term working memory,
which evaporates almost immediately after the test is over.
But when you study consistently for an hour a day over 4 months,
you are methodically moving that information into deep, long-term storage. You have to give your physical brain the biological time it requires to do its job.
Which brings us to the most actionable, tangible part of our deep dive today. We understand the traps we've fallen into. We understand the math and the timeline.
Now, how do we actually translate these overarching biological concepts into a tangible daily schedule.
Let's architect the 60 to 90-minute blueprint.
We are aiming to establish a non-negotiable baseline of 60 to 90 minutes of highly focused practice per day.
60 to 90 minutes, that sounds completely manageable, but also surprisingly short compared to people who study for 6 hours a day.
It is short, but it is intense, 5 or 6 days a week. That is the optimal cognitive sweet spot before diminishing returns set in.
We have to be brutally realistic about who is taking this test.
Right. Most people listening to this deep dive are not full-time language scholars who can dedicate 8 hours a day to uninterrupted study.
You have full-time jobs, you have demanding university classes, you have families to take care of.
You have lives that require your attention. 60 minutes of highly focused, uninterrupted practice with your phone physically placed in another room, all notifications turned off.
Is infinitely more valuable and will generate more neuroplasticity than 3 hours of half-hearted, distracted studying where you are checking your social media feeds every 10 minutes.
It's so true.
Okay, let's unpack this daily blueprint, starting with input, reading and listening.
Reading is often referred to as building academic stamina.
And that word stamina is so incredibly crucial. The reading section throws these incredibly dense, esoteric academic passages at you.
In a single hour, you might face a passage on the cellular biology of marine algae, followed immediately by the socio-economic history of the Roman Empire.
Followed by the linguistics of indigenous languages, and finally ending with the complex astrophysics of distant pulsars.
And this is precisely where the paralyzing panic sets in for so many intelligent test takers. They look at a dense passage on astrophysics, and their internal narrative screams, "I am an art history major. I know absolutely nothing about the life cycle of a star."
I don't know what a neutron is. I am going to fail this entire section.
Right.
If I'm listening to this right now, that's spot on my fear.
Ah.
What if I know nothing about astronomy? How am I supposed to survive a college-level text about it?
This requires a fundamental, immediate mindset shift. Subject matter expertise is entirely, unequivocally irrelevant.
Irrelevant.
Completely. The test makers are not testing your encyclopedic knowledge of astronomy. They are solely testing your ability to follow the logical, structural flow of an academic English text.
So the passage itself contains every single piece of factual information you need to answer the question.
Yes. Your job is not to act as a scientist debating the facts. Your job is to act as a linguistic detective, tracing the architecture of the author's argument. Where is the main thesis? What evidence supports it? What is the counter-argument?
So how do you practically build that specific detective skill? The actionable advice is that you have to read every single day.
But you cannot read young adult fiction or casual blogs. You need to read high-level academic English.
Publications like the New York Times Science section, Scientific American, National Geographic.
These sources utilize serious, clear, structurally organized prose. They use the exact same complex transitional phrases and rhetorical markers that the actual test uses.
But simply dragging your eyes across the page isn't enough, right?
No, you can't just passively skim an article about climate change while drinking your morning coffee and mentally check the box that you studied.
You must read actively.
The most effective, neurologically engaging strategy is to read the article fully and then immediately close the browser tab, put the text away so you can't see it.
Then what?
Then, out loud to an empty room or on a blank piece of paper, force yourself to summarize the main idea, the 3 supporting arguments, and the final conclusion entirely in your own words.
You are forcing your brain to synthesize the information without a safety net.
You are forcing the brain to recognize and reconstruct the information hierarchy. That is the exact cognitive muscle the reading questions will ask you to flex.
And crucially, you must practice this under severe time pressure.
When you eventually transition to using official ETS practice materials, you must respect the clock. You have roughly 18 to 20 minutes per reading passage.
Time pressure fundamentally changes the entire experience.
It alters your brain chemistry. Learning to pace yourself, developing the intuition of knowing when to quickly skim a paragraph for a minor detail and when to slow down and read deeply for the main thesis. That is a physical, practiced skill.
And skills are only forged through repeated, timed, pressurized practice, not just by understanding the theoretical concept behind them.
All right, let's look at the other half of input, listening.
Which is often called the foundation of everything, and I really love how strongly this is emphasized. Improving your listening comprehension is arguably the single most transformative, high-leverage thing you can do for your overall score.
Because it truly is the keystone skill. It supports the entire massive structure of the exam.
When your listening improves, your speaking score naturally begins to rise because your brain internalizes better pronunciation and natural rhythm.
Your vocabulary expands exponentially because you are learning words contextually, not in isolation.
And crucially, your ability to survive the integrated tasks, the speaking and writing prompts that rely heavily on you comprehending a spoken lecture first, skyrockets.
Listening is not isolated to one 30-point section. It bleeds into the entire test.
So how do we actually train this keystone skill? We know watching movies with subtitles doesn't work. The specific, highly effective technique we need to deep dive into is a practice called shadowing.
Shadowing is an incredibly powerful neurological tool. If you take nothing else away from this discussion, and if you're not currently doing it, you need to implement shadowing tomorrow morning.
Let's break down the mechanics of how to shadow properly. First, you find a piece of clearly spoken, native-level English audio.
It could be an academic lecture on YouTube, a complex TED Talk, or even a chapter of a dense audiobook.
You listen to a very short, isolated segment, maybe 30 to 60 seconds, no more than a minute, because you don't want to overwhelm your working memory.
You just sit back and listen to it once. Then you play that exact same short segment again. But this time, you speak out loud, actively talking over the speaker in real time.
You are essentially trying to become a real-time echo of the speaker.
You are matching their vocal rhythm. You are matching exactly where they take a breath to pause. You are matching which specific syllables they stress and which filler words they swallow or mumble.
You are forcefully matching their speed. I always compare shadowing to learning to play the piano by ear.
That's a good way to look at it.
You aren't sitting there trying to read the complex sheet music. You are literally sitting on the bench next to the master pianist, placing your hands hovering just over theirs and forcing your fingers to press the keys at the exact same millisecond they do.
You are building pure physical muscle memory before you even fully understand the complex music theory behind the song.
And the golden rule of shadowing is no translating.
No, you are not pausing to analyze the grammar structure or translate the meaning of the paragraph into your native language. You are simply absorbing the physical muscular sensation of producing the English language at that high speed and cadence.
This raises a profoundly important point about the emotional and psychological experience of shadowing.
We have to be completely honest with the listener. Shadowing feels incredibly profoundly awkward at first.
It feels chaotic.
It feels almost impossible. You will absolutely stumble over your words. You will fall behind the speaker within 5 seconds. You will run out of breath.
You will completely lose the thread of the sentence and sound like you are babbling.
You will feel ridiculous sitting alone in your bedroom talking over a random YouTube video.
You will. And that feeling of intense awkwardness and frustration is completely biologically normal.
That friction you feel is the literal sensation of your brain desperately trying to build new auditory and motor pathways simultaneously. It is your motor cortex struggling to coordinate your tongue, lips, and vocal cords in unfamiliar patterns.
The absolute key to success is that you must push through that initial week of awkwardness.
If you stick with it, if you shadow for just 15 focused minutes a day after 2 or 3 weeks, a remarkable biological adaptation occurs. Your articulatory muscles adapt to the new demands.
English will begin to flow out of your mouth with significantly less conscious effort.
And you will suddenly realize that you can process native speed audio without that spike of panic.
It is literal resistance training for your articulatory muscles and your auditory cortex.
And alongside the daily shadowing, when you sit down to do specific listening practice with official materials, you have to completely master the art of note-taking.
The listening section features agonizingly long lectures and multi-person conversations that last for minutes. You absolutely cannot rely on your short-term memory to hold all that data.
But note-taking is where we see so many high-level students fail catastrophically. They try to act like a court stenographer.
They try to write down complete grammatically correct sentences as the professor is speaking.
That is a mathematically guaranteed way to miss the next 3 sentences of the lecture.
You are constantly playing a game of catch-up that you can never win.
Because writing is slower than speaking. Effective academic note-taking is an aggressive shorthand. You should only be writing down the absolute critical keywords, major conceptual names, crucial dates or numbers, and most importantly, visual symbols that represent the logical relationships between the ideas.
Use an arrow to signify cause and effect.
Use an equal sign for a synonym or a definition. Use a big X to cross out an opposing view the professor disagrees with.
You are rapidly creating a visual structural map of the lecture's flow, not a word-for-word transcript.
Okay, so we've built the academic stamina for reading, and we've laid the impenetrable foundation with listening and shadowing.
Now, we must shift our focus to conquering the output domains, speaking and writing. We are moving from passively absorbing information to actively producing language under strict, unforgiving time pressure.
This transition from input to output is where the performance anxiety usually hits its absolute peak.
Let's tackle the speaking section first. The core philosophy here is fluency over fear. We briefly touched on what the evaluators are looking for: delivery, language use, and topic development.
But we need to dig much deeper into what actively penalizes your score.
The absolute biggest enemy, the most destructive force to a high speaking score, is silence. Dead air.
And this happens because so many of us, especially high-achieving students, are deeply ingrained perfectionists.
You hear the prompt, the timer starts, and you frantically start trying to mentally construct the most grammatically flawless, sophisticated, impressive sentence possible before you even open your mouth.
You want the first word to be perfect.
And while you are internally debating whether to use the past perfect or the simple past tense, the digital clock is mercilessly ticking.
5 seconds of silence. 10 seconds of silence. To an exhausted human evaluator listening to your recording, that long silence indicates a fundamental breakdown in language capability.
It strongly suggests to them that you lack the basic vocabulary or grammatical flexibility to express yourself spontaneously.
Fluency, which fundamentally means the ability to keep the forward momentum of communication going, even if you make a minor grammatical error or have to awkwardly self-correct mid-sentence, is highly rewarded.
The evaluators infinitely prefer a slightly imperfect, continuous, natural flow of ideas over 10 agonizing seconds of silence, followed by one perfectly constructed sentence.
So the actionable daily advice to conquer this perfectionist fear and build that continuous flow is a specific drill. You must speak for 45 seconds every single day on completely random topics.
The total randomness of the topics is the active ingredient in this drill.
Right. You cannot prep. You cannot write an outline. Just look around your room or use a free random topic generator on your phone. Describe your favorite childhood memory involving weather.
What is a major problem facing public transportation in your specific city?
Discuss the long-term advantages of solar energy over fossil fuels. Set a timer for 45 seconds. Hit the record button on your voice memo app and talk until that timer goes off.
Do not stop speaking, even if you start talking nonsense.
And the second part of that exercise is arguably more important than the speaking itself. You must force yourself to listen back to the recording immediately.
Ouch. That is the truly painful part. Nobody likes hearing their own recorded voice.
It is deeply uncomfortable, especially in a second language where you feel vulnerable. But you have to detach your ego and become a clinician. You have to analyze your own performance objectively.
Where exactly did you pause for too long? Where did you lose your train of thought entirely and start panicking?
Where did your grammar suddenly break down because you tried to use a sentence structure that was too complex? Identify those specific weak spots, and then, this is the crucial step, do the exact same prompt again.
And for those integrated speaking tasks, the highly complex ones, where you have to read a short text, listen to a conversation about that text, and then verbally summarize both sources under a time limit, the absolute best safety net you can build for yourself is internalizing a template.
Templates are a psychological lifesaver when you are under severe stress.
You internalize a rigid framework, something like, the reading passage introduces the concept of X. In the listening passage, the professor elaborates on this concept by providing two specific examples. First, she mentions Y. This directly connects to the reading because Z.
You drill that skeletal structure into your brain until it is automatic.
So when your heart is pounding out of your chest and your mind goes entirely blank, you do not have to waste precious working memory thinking about how to organize your answer. You just pour the raw content you heard into the pre-built mold.
It effectively offloads the massive cognitive burden of structural organization, freeing up your brain to focus entirely on recalling the correct vocabulary and maintaining a smooth, confident delivery.
This brings us to the writing section. And this is where we run into one of the most stubborn, pervasive, and damaging myths in the entire language learning ecosystem, the myth of complexity.
It is incredibly detrimental to students' scores.
Here's where it gets really interesting. So many highly intelligent students genuinely believe that to secure a top score on academic writing, they need to produce a profound, literary masterpiece.
They think they need to use those massive, obscure words from the pantry we talked about earlier.
They write sentences that are 4 lines long, filled with convoluted passive structures and semicolons. They forcefully cram, ameliorate, and ostensibly into an essay about public parks, even if those words don't quite fit the specific context.
And the evaluators see right through it instantly. We have to cultivate empathy for the grader. Imagine a human evaluator sitting at a desk, drinking their 4th cup of coffee, grading their 300th essay of the day.
They are exhausted.
When they see a convoluted, unnecessarily dense sentence, it causes cognitive friction. Using a complex word incorrectly hurts your score infinitely more than using a simple, clear word correctly.
The writing rubric heavily, disproportionately, rewards crystal clarity, logical organization, and the ability to support your claims with highly specific, concrete evidence.
Clarity over complexity. Always, without exception.
For the integrated writing task, where you are synthesizing a reading passage in a lecture, the master skill you absolutely must develop is paraphrasing.
You have to prove to the tired evaluator that you genuinely understood the source material by expressing the core ideas using different vocabulary and different sentence structures without altering the original meaning.
And that requires dedicated daily practice. Take a dense paragraph from one of those Scientific American articles you are reading for stamina. Read it, cover it up with your hand, and force yourself to rewrite the core message of that paragraph using entirely different vocabulary.
Then uncover the original and compare them objectively. Did you successfully maintain the core meaning? Did you capture the subtle nuance, or did you accidentally change the author's intent?
And for the independent writing task, where you have to argue your own personal opinion on a prompt, the most effective advice is almost refreshingly boring. Rely entirely on the basic, unglamorous, highly traditional 5-paragraph essay structure.
It isn't exciting, it isn't creative, it isn't going to win a Pulitzer Prize for literature, but it works. Consistently, every single time.
Let's map it out. Paragraph 1. A brief introduction with a crystal clear, unmistakable thesis statement at the very end.
Paragraph 2. Your first main supporting point, anchored by a highly specific real-world example.
Paragraph 3. Your second supporting point with another specific example.
Paragraph 4. A third point, or perhaps a concession to an opposing view that you quickly logically refute, again with an example.
Paragraph 5. A brief, punchy conclusion restating your main thesis in new words.
Why do evaluators love this seemingly basic structure? Because it completely removes cognitive friction. A predictable, logically structured essay makes their exhausting job incredibly easy.
They don't have to hunt through a wall of text to find your main idea. They know it's sitting right there at the end of the first paragraph.
They don't have to guess how your examples connect to your points. You've used clear transitional phrases like furthermore, or for instance.
You are serving your entire argument to them on a silver platter, making it effortless for them to award you points.
So practically speaking, you write at least one full practice essay every week, run it through a reliable online grammar evaluation tool, or give it to a trusted teacher.
The goal isn't to produce a flawless first draft. It's to track gradual, measurable improvement in your clarity and organization week over week.
Which brings us perfectly to the architecture of the week itself. We have the daily micro-level blueprint, the 60 to 90 minutes of focused work. But how do we structure the macro-level week to ensure we hit all 4 of these domains without slamming into a brick wall of cognitive burnout?
Structuring the week to actively prevent burnout is non-negotiable. If you're listening on your commute right now, you might be thinking, I barely have time to sleep, let alone add 90 minutes of shadowing, reading, speaking drills, and essay writing to my daily to-do list.
But let's look at the recommended weekly rhythm.
Monday and Tuesday, you focus heavily on input, reading and listening. You might read one academic article actively, verbally summarizing it afterward. You do one set of timed practice listening questions, and you spend a dedicated 15 minutes doing your shadowing practice with a TED Talk.
Wednesday and Thursday, you shift gears entirely to output, speaking and writing. You do 2 or 3 of those 45-second recorded speaking responses, analyzing them critically, and you write one practice paragraph focusing intensely on paraphrasing or building out a single, perfectly structured body paragraph for an essay.
Notice the underlying mechanism here. We are actively interleaving the skills. We aren't doing 5 straight days of exhausting reading practice.
We are constantly shifting the cognitive load, giving specific neural pathways time to rest while activating others.
Right. Then Friday is simulation day. You do a mini practice test, one timed reading passage, one timed listening section. 1 speaking response under extreme time pressure, 1 writing task.
You are actively building your biological tolerance to test day adrenaline.
Saturday is crucial. Saturday is review day. You absolutely do not take new tests. You forensically analyze Friday's performance. You look at your mistakes. Why did you get that reading question wrong? Was it a genuine lack of vocabulary, or did you simply misread the question prompt because you were rushing?
And then we reach Sunday.
Sunday is rest. Complete, unapologetic rest. Period.
And we need to emphasize to the listener that taking Sunday off is not a polite suggestion. It is neurologically mandatory.
Burnout is not just a feeling of being tired. It is a profoundly real physiological phenomenon.
It is one of the primary reasons highly motivated students hit a plateau and stop improving entirely. When you push too hard for too long, when studying becomes a source of daily dread and torture, your brain begins to implicitly associate the English language with high stress, cortisol, and fatigue.
And when that negative biological association forms, your cognitive flexibility drops to 0.
Your brain literally stops absorbing new information to protect itself. You have to fiercely protect your mental energy reserves. Taking Sunday completely off allows the brain to consolidate the week's learning into long-term memory.
Rest is not an absence of progress. Biological rest is a vital, active component of the progress itself.
Let's look at how this schedule, this highly structured blueprint, actually plays out in the real world. We have 3 specific case studies to explore, and they are fascinating because they represent vastly different types of learners dealing with completely different life constraints and psychological struggles.
These narratives are incredibly illuminating. They move the neuroscience and the theory out of the lab and into harsh reality.
First, we have the case of Priya. Priya was a 23-year-old biology student. She took the TOEFL twice, and both times she scored a frustratingly stagnant 75.
She was incredibly demotivated, embarrassed, and on the verge of entirely abandoning her lifelong goal of studying in Canada.
But here's the fascinating paradox about Priya. Her casual conversational English was actually quite good. She could chat with native speakers easily.
This is a classic, very common profile, the confident conversationalist who completely falls apart on the academic test.
When you dig into her daily habits, the root cause becomes blatantly clear. Priya had never once practiced under timed conditions. In her university lab, she was a meticulous, highly careful reader. She would read a paper 3 times to ensure she understood every detail.
In a lab setting, that is a phenomenal necessary trait. But on the TOEFL reading section, reading carefully and slowly is fatal. It mathematically guarantees that you will run out of time on the final passage.
She also had a massive hidden handicap in the speaking section. Because she was a generally good conversationalist, she felt overly confident. She had never actually recorded herself speaking.
She had absolutely no idea that her speech was completely littered with unconscious filler words. Yeah.
In casual daily conversation, our brains naturally filter those out. We don't even hear them. But to a grader listening to a highly compressed, recorded exam response, those constant fragments completely shatter the delivery score.
So what was the specific intervention for Priya?
She rigorously applied the blueprint. She established a strict 60-minute daily routine for 4 straight months. She ruthlessly forced herself to read complex articles under strict timed conditions every single day, painfully breaking her deeply ingrained habit of slow, meticulous perfectionism.
She recorded 3 speaking responses every week, forcing herself to listen back, confront the painful reality of her filler words, and actively eliminate them.
She implemented 15 minutes of shadowing every morning to tighten up her cadence and make it more academic.
And 4 months later, on her 3rd official attempt, she scored a 101, a massive life-changing jump from 75.
And the crucial underlying takeaway here is that Priya did not magically become 26 points more intelligent in those 4 months. She didn't uncover a secret vocabulary cheat code.
She simply aligned her physical practice methods with the biological demands of the test. She practiced the right things in the right way with unyielding consistency.
Then we have Amir. This story is so universally inspiring because it deals head-on with the biggest excuse we all use to avoid hard things, a lack of time.
Amir was 28 years old. He was working at a busy, chaotic family restaurant in Turkey 6 days a week. Exhausting, on your feet, physical labor.
He held a dream of studying hospitality management in Australia, but he literally only had about 45 minutes of actual free time a day.
For someone in Amir's position, achieving a high score on a grueling academic exam feels impossibly far away. How do you possibly prepare for the TOEFL when your body is exhausted and your calendar is full?
What Amir did was an act of sheer brilliance. He turned his entire daily existence into a language practice arena. He knew he didn't have the luxury of sitting at a quiet mahogany desk for 3 hours, so he optimized the chaotic margins of his day.
He listened to high-level English podcasts during his loud, crowded commute.
On his brief 15-minute breaks sitting in the alley behind the restaurant, he watched English YouTube videos on his phone. But crucially, he forced himself to watch them without the subtitles.
He kept a tiny, beat-up pocket notebook in his apron while he waited tables, quickly scribbling down new vocabulary words he encountered, always writing them down within a full sentence to preserve the context.
He essentially engineered a relentless artificial immersion environment within his daily life. And then, those precious 45 minutes of formal sit-down study time he did have at night were treated as absolutely sacred.
Intensely focused. No phone, no family distractions. Just pure, targeted, highly concentrated TOEFL practice.
It took him 7 full months of this grueling routine, longer than the average timeline, but look at the extreme constraints he was operating under.
He ultimately scored a 97. It was 3 points shy of a perfect 100, but it was perfectly enough to get him accepted into his target program in Sydney. He reached his goal.
Amir's narrative is a powerful testament to the fact that you absolutely do not need perfect, pristine conditions to succeed. You do not need a completely empty calendar or a quiet study room. You just need to be relentlessly, aggressively resourceful with the tiny pockets of time you do have.
And finally, we have May. May's story will resonate deeply with anyone who has ever felt their heart practically pound out of their chest during an exam.
May was a quiet, highly introverted, deeply intelligent student from China. Her reading and listening scores were phenomenal. She consistently scored above 25 in both.
But her speaking score was firmly anchored at a devastating 17. It was acting like an anchor, dragging her entire total score down below a 90.
The underlying problem wasn't a lack of academic vocabulary or poor grammar mechanics. The problem was pure, unadulterated performance anxiety, paralyzing biological fear.
The exact moment she saw that red microphone icon on the monitor, her breathing became shallow, her prefrontal cortex blanked, and all her meticulous preparation evaporated in a flood of cortisol.
So how on earth do you study for fear? You can't fix a panic nervous system with a vocabulary flashcard. May's brilliant solution was exposure therapy.
Which sounds highly clinical, but the practical application of it was incredibly clever.
Exposure therapy, in a psychological context, simply means systematically, repeatedly placing yourself in low-stakes versions of the exact situation that terrifies you over and over until your primitive nervous system finally realizes you are not in actual physical danger.
She deliberately and systematically desensitized herself to the terrifying experience of speaking English on demand. She started a YouTube channel entirely about traditional Chinese cooking, but she narrated the videos entirely in English.
The channel only had a handful of subscribers, but the subscriber count didn't matter. The physical act of turning on a camera, hitting record, and speaking English to an invisible audience was the vital medicine.
She joined online language exchange platforms and forced herself, despite her introversion, to speak with complete strangers via webcam 3 times a week. She read dense English passages out loud to her empty bedroom every single morning.
She was intentionally flooding her nervous system with the exact stimulus of speaking English under pressure until the novelty completely wore off, until the act of speaking into a microphone became as mundane and boring as brushing her teeth.
And when she sat down to take the official TOEFL 3 months later, that little red microphone icon on the screen didn't look like a threat anymore. It didn't trigger her amygdala.
It was just another normal speaking scenario, no different from narrating a cooking video in her kitchen or talking to a random language partner online.
Her speaking score naturally jumped from a 17 to a highly competent 23, bringing her total score to a 96. Again, it wasn't a flawless 100, but it completely dismantled the specific psychological barrier that was holding her back. She conquered the biology of her fear.
If we pull back and connect this to the overarching bigger picture, what fundamentally unites Priya, Amir, and May? It isn't just that they faithfully followed a daily schedule. It is that they possess the deep psychological endurance to push through immense painful friction.
And that requires us to transition and talk openly about the often ignored reality of the mental game of language mastery.
Because the emotional, psychological experience of preparing for a test like this for 6 months is rarely discussed in textbooks. We talk endlessly about grammar rules, we talk about pacing and timing, but we rarely talk about those dark days when you are so frustrated you just want to throw your laptop out the window and give up.
We have to openly acknowledge the harsh reality of plateaus. Progress in complex language learning is virtually never a clean, straight line angled cleanly upward. It looks much more like a staircase with incredibly long, frustratingly flat steps.
There will absolutely be weeks, sometimes a full month or more, where you feel like you are working harder than you ever have in your life, and your mock test scores remain completely stubbornly stagnant.
You'll take a practice test, see a specific reading question types that you know you've studied a dozen times, and you will still get it wrong. You'll record a speaking response, force yourself to listen back to it, and swear it sounds even worse than the one you recorded 3 weeks ago.
And this plateau is the exact, precise... this is the exact moment where the vast majority of students simply quit. They interpret this extended stagnation as absolute proof of their own failure. They think, I've hit my limit.
But it is not failure. It is simply the invisible, necessary middle of the biological learning process.
Think of it exactly like intense physical training.
Yeah. If you go to the gym and lift heavy weights, you don't literally see your muscles expanding and growing larger while you are straining and sweating under the barbell. In fact, while you are actively lifting, you are actually creating microscopic damaging tears in your muscle fibers.
You leave the gym feeling physically weaker, not stronger.
The actual biological growth, the strengthening of the tissue, happens entirely invisibly over the next 48 hours while you are resting, recovering, eating, and sleeping. Language learning functions on the exact same biological principle.
That is a profoundly accurate way to conceptualize it. While you are sitting at your desk studying, you are actively stressing and fatiguing your neural networks. The actual integration of that new knowledge, the microscopic structural changes in the brain's synapses that ultimately lead to increased fluency and faster comprehension, happen entirely behind the scenes, largely while you sleep.
You are painstakingly building the necessary biological foundation for a sudden, massive breakthrough, a sudden jump in your score. But you cannot accurately predict when that structural jump will finally manifest.
This raises an important question for the listener. Are you letting a single bad practice session or a frustrating 2-week plateau convince you that you have hit the absolute ceiling of your intellectual potential? Are you confusing the difficult, invisible middle of the biological process with the end of the road?
The ultimate secret to achieving a 100-plus score is not raw genetic genius. It is the quiet, highly unglamorous, gritty discipline of sitting down at your desk on a random Tuesday night, when it's raining outside, when you are physically exhausted from your job, when your last practice test was deeply disappointing, when you have absolutely zero motivation or dopamine, and choosing to do the 60 minutes of work anyway.
It's about showing up long after the initial excitement has completely worn off.
But to maintain that level of grueling discipline over 6 months, many learners have to confront a much deeper, hidden psychological hurdle. They have to actively rewrite their internal narrative.
Let's talk deeply about that internal narrative, because so many of us carry actual unresolved trauma regarding our English skills. It might be from a harsh, impatient teacher in middle school who publicly mocked our pronunciation in front of the class.
It might be from receiving a devastatingly low score on an early proficiency test that made us feel stupid.
It might be from a humiliating interaction with an impatient native speaker who sighed aggressively and rolled their eyes when we politely asked them to repeat a sentence.
Those negative experiences are incredibly visceral. They leave lasting emotional scars on the psyche. And over years, those scars coalesce into a heavy, persistent internal story. A toxic voice that whispers in the background of your mind every single time you open a TOEFL textbook. I am just not naturally good at English. This language is unnatural for me. I sound foolish when I speak. I do not belong in a high-level academic space.
And that deeply ingrained internal story acts as a massive, continuous cognitive drain. It quietly leaches your mental energy while you study. If your brain is constantly fighting a background battle against the belief that you are inherently flawed and incapable, every single reading passage is going to feel twice as long. Every listening task is going to feel twice as fast.
You are running a marathon with a weighted vest on.
So how do you practically go about rewriting that toxic narrative? You don't do it with shallow, toxic positivity. You don't stand in front of your bathroom mirror and lie to yourself, repeating affirmations that you have a perfect score when you are still clearly struggling.
Your brain will reject the lie. You rewrite the narrative by shifting your daily focus exclusively to your own tangible, measurable progress.
You have to consciously force yourself to look backward to realize how high up the mountain you've actually climbed.
You focus relentlessly on the micro victories. Did you sit down, read a complex, convoluted sentence about astrophysics today, and understand the grammatical structure immediately? A sentence that would have looked like absolute, undecipherable gibberish to you 6 months ago.
Yes, that happens all the time if you're consistent.
That is real, undeniable biological progress. Did you listen to a dense TED Talk today and find yourself naturally anticipating the speaker's next logical point before they even made it?
Did you complete a terrifying 45-second speaking drill and realize you only paused awkwardly once instead of the 4 times you paused last week? You must consciously honor the new neural pathways your brain is actively, physically building.
You are quite literally rewiring the structure of your mind. You have to respect the sheer magnitude of that biological achievement.
It is entirely about changing your core identity from I am someone who is permanently struggling with English to I am someone who is actively, successfully building my English proficiency every single day.
And that profound shift in identity brings us to the final stretch of our deep dive today. We have comprehensively deconstructed the dangerous traps of passive studying. We've outlined the raw math and what the exhausted evaluators truly reward.
We've built a concrete, biologically sound daily blueprint for both input and output. We've looked at the real-world grit of students who conquered burnout, extreme time constraints, and paralyzing anxiety. And we've unpacked the necessary mental endurance required to survive the inevitable plateaus.
We have thoroughly mapped the territory. We have provided the blueprint. But having the map is not the same as walking the journey. The listeners still have to wake up tomorrow and take those steps.
And as you, the listener, prepare to take those steps tomorrow morning, I want to leave you with a massive shift in perspective. The English language, with all its bizarre, contradictory spelling rules, its endless phrasal verbs, and its complicated grammar exceptions, it is not your enemy. It is not a massive, unscalable concrete wall deliberately built to stand between you and your dreams.
It is simply a door.
It is just a door. And through your hard work, you already hold the key in your hand.
The future you are constantly envisioning, the acceptance letter from your dream university, the challenging research scholarship, the brilliant professors who will mentor you, the international colleagues who will one day sit in a room, listen to your ideas, and marvel at your clarity. They're all patiently waiting for you on the other side of that door.
The only question left to answer is whether you are willing to execute the disciplined, highly strategic habit building required to finally turn the lock.
It is a profoundly liberating realization when you finally see the test, not as a cruel gatekeeper designed to reject you, but simply as a neutral mechanical mechanism measuring a specific set of acquired skills that you now know how to biologically and practically acquire.
Which leads me to a final provocative thought for you to carry into your next study session when things get hard.
If mastering this daunting, intimidating, globally recognized exam is fundamentally just a matter of structured discipline, consistent habit building, and facing your fears through exposure therapy, what other seemingly impossible barriers in your life could be entirely dismantled using this exact same blueprint? Think about it.
The framework of true mastery transfers to absolutely everything we do.
It truly does. Thank you for joining us on this extensive exploration of the path to 100+. We know the hours are long, we know the friction is high, but we also know that you are entirely capable of reaching the summit. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Keep building those pathways. We'll see you on the next deep dive.